Ronnie, let me start with you. We are just getting new reports of some new U.S. airstrikes inside Iraq. What can you tell us? What have you heard so far?
Well, it's kind of been coming in real slowly because there's been some different reports throughout the day that turn out not to be true. But it looks like the U.S. seems to have launched some airstrikes against a PMU base north of Baghdad and killed up to 6 people. And that's on top of 11 people they killed last night. Plus, there was at least 25 people they killed 3 or 4 days ago that led to the protests at the embassy. So you're talking about like upwards of 40 Iraqi soldiers killed by the U.S. in less than a week. This is a massive escalation. And let's remember, this is against Iraqi soldiers. The PMU, the PMF, Popular Mobilization Forces, were a couple of years ago absorbed into the Iraqi armed forces. So they're no longer just a militia. They're a part of the Iraqi military. So the U.S. is essentially targeting Iraqi soldiers and calling them Iranian. And that's a part of the U.S.'s escalation on Iran. It's basically a war against Iraq. And then on top of that, of course, you have the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, the elite unit of the IRGC that's in charge of Iran's operations outside of Iran, last night on Iraqi territory, which is a huge violation of Iraqi sovereignty. It has essentially means the relationship between Iraq and the U.S. is over. The Iraqis are basically saying the U.S. needs to leave. So the U.S., has just gone insane the last couple of days in its escalation against this war on Iraq. It's really reached an entirely new level that's a much more dangerous place than it was last week.
When you say that the relationship between the U.S. and Iraq is over, do you think that Iraq can stand up to the U.S.? And if they do, how will it go down? And talk about the role of figures like Ali al-Sistani, who just recently, I believe today, made a pretty important announcement about reactivating some of the brigades who previously fought ISIS and fought the U.S.
Well, it's not just Sistani, who the PMF listens to. In this case, it's also other Shias. So you have Muqtada Sadr, who's also like somebody who goes back and forth being aligned with the U.S. and not over the past couple of decades. And now he's coming out against the U.S. It's other pro-American Shias who are coming out against the U.S. Basically, the U.S. has made it impossible in Iraq for any politician to be pro-American. When you bomb a country's armed forces, these are guys that fought ISIS. They're looked at as heroes, even despite the protests that took place where people were blaming the PMF for killing protesters, which isn't entirely true, but partly true. Even despite that, these are guys who saved the country from a complete ISIS takeover. They're looked at in a respectful manner. And if anything, this has kind of united people around Iraqi nationalism and around their armed forces and against the U.S. because you have the U.S. violating Iraqi sovereignty. It's a complete insult. And now what you see is pressure from the pro-Iranian people, from the anti-American people on the pro-American politicians in Iraq to come out against America. So it's just not politically feasible to be pro-American in Iraq at this point. And so that's why you see all of these Shiite politicians who otherwise might have been pro-American now saying that the U.S. has to leave and agreeing to that because of that pressure. Now, whether the U.S. will listen to that, I don't know. But typically, the U.S. doesn't like to stay in a country unless it has a formal agreement with the country. Syria is like a special case where they don't have a formal agreement, but for the most part, they don't typically like to keep their military in a country that doesn't have an agreement to keep them there. So I can't see the U.S. staying there for that long. They've already kind of evacuated the embassy. They're already telling American citizens to leave Iraq. So if anything, it seems like they were expecting this outcome and perhaps don't even see Iraq as a necessary partner anymore. It seems like maybe they already felt Iraq was already lost to Iran.
Max Blumenthal, why don't you pick